If you're in perimenopause and you've tried the stress management approaches, the breathwork, the better sleep routine, the magnesium, the gut protocols, and they worked for a while and then stopped, or they never quite held the way you expected, the problem is not what you've been doing, it's what happened to the physiology underneath it. And here's the part that most approaches miss: the right interventions applied in the wrong order to a physiology that has fundamentally shifted produce the same partial results as the wrong interventions. Order is the missing variable. That's what this episode is about. Welcome to the Perimenopause Reset. I am Miriam Fajay, functional nutritionist, and I specialize in gut hormone health for women in perimenopause and menopause. Y'all, this show exists for one reason: because the standard advice for perimenopause, manage your stress, fix your gut, balance your hormones, is not wrong, it's just incomplete. And when you apply the right interventions in the wrong order to a physiology that has fundamentally shifted, you get the results most women describe to me: partial, stalling, or temporary. Every episode of this show gives you the clinical piece that's missing, the one that makes the thing you've already been doing actually hold. So today episode is part of a series on the cortisol drift, the hormonal mechanism that sits underneath most of what gets described as perimenopause symptoms. Now, this episode gives you the build. Next episode will be integrate it, okay? So that's going to be next week. Now, if you are here, this episode stands completely on its own, okay? But if you want to hear today, but if what you hear today resonates, then I want you to go back and look at the previous episodes, okay? Because they build the foundation. Now, here's what you're going to leave with today. You're going to understand the biological reason your stress response changed in perimenopause, and specifically why it changed in a way that made everything you'd been doing for it less effective. You're going to hear how that shift hits 5 different gut hormone patterns, 5 completely different ways. Same cortisol problem, 5 different physiological cascades. And you're going to learn the clinical sequence that rebuilds your cortisol protection in the correct order. That sequence is called a tri-shift. 3 axes, and the order is not a preference, it's a clinical requirement. So I'm going to show you exactly why. Now, this episode is for you if you've been doing the work and hitting a ceiling that you can't explain. Now, one thing before we go in, this episode is most useful if you know your good hormone archetype. Now, my free quiz is in the show notes. It takes about 4 minutes. Your result is delivered to your inbox along with your specific protocol entry point. I want you to take it now, or you can pause at the archetype section in about 8 minutes. All right, so let's go. Let's go. I want to start with a question that I get asked almost more than anything else, okay? Almost every day. Why did stress stop working? Listen, we're women, of a certain age. We're 40 and older, right? And so things that used to work that we were doing and got wonderful results seem like we're just not getting those same results anymore. And the question is not why am I more stressed, but why did the approaches that used to help stop helping the way they used to? Okay? The breath work that used to bring you down in 5 minutes now takes about 20. The sleep protocol they used to hold now holds some nights and not others. The gut work, the dietary changes, they move the needle and then they stop. That is a specific physiological change that most stress management frameworks were not built to address. Now, here's the mechanism: estrogen modulates glucocorticoid receptors, the binding sites for cortisol. part of the system that reads the cortisol signal and tells your body stress response is done, stand down. When estrogen is stable, those receptors function at full sensitivity. The system resets. That is the hormonal buffer. In perimenopause, estrogen doesn't just decline, it fluctuates, often dramatically, right, before it settles lower. And as it fluctuates, that receptor sensitivity fluctuates with it. The buffer thins. Now, these are three consequences, okay? Larger amplitude, same stressor, bigger spike, not because you're weaker, because the dampening mechanism has less capacity. Second is longer recovery. Cortisol takes longer to return to baseline. More time is spent elevated per stressor. And then third, rising baseline. The floor doesn't fully reset between events. The set point creeps up. The SWAN study, y'all, tracked cortisol across the perimenopausal transition. There were three findings. Number one, greater cortisol reactivity to standardized stressors. Two, longer recovery window. And three, cortisol floor elevation was most pronounced in the late evening and pre-dawn window. That pre-dawn elevation is the physiological driver of the 3 a.m. wake, not anxiety, a cortisol signal arriving at the wrong time because the floor has been risen and the rhythm has shifted. Every stress management intervention works by acting on the buffer. When the buffer is intact, those interventions are effective. When the buffer has thinned, when the set point has shifted, those same interventions are working on top of the set point, not addressing it. And that is why they stall. So, restoring cortisol resilience requires addressing that set point shift directly before layering interventions on top of it. Here's what makes the cortisol drift so clinically significant: it doesn't produce the same breakdown in every woman. The same cortisol elevation hits five different gut hormone patterns, five completely different ways. Same stress, same rise in baseline, five different physiological cascades, five different symptom pictures, five different protocol requirements. So this next section we're going into, y'all, tells you which one is yours. So there are five gut hormone archetypes. I want you to listen for yours, not just the name, but the clinical picture. That's what determines your entry point into the rebuild. Archetype 1 is what I call cortisol wired. Now, the mechanism is glucocorticoid receptor desensitization. So, chronic cortisol elevation causes receptors to downregulate. The body produces more cortisol, trying to get the same regulatory effect, which further desensitizes the receptors. So the wire but tired pattern is this cycle described precisely: high cortisol signal, blunted receptor response. The protocol logic is reduction based. Restore receptor sensitivity, not supplement around it. Archetype 2 is what I call insulin inflamed. Now, the mechanism is the cortisol glucose cycle. Cortisol chronically raises blood glucose, which leads to chronic insulin, which leads to insulin resistance, leading to inflammation, and then elevated cortisol. So, dietary work alone plateaus because the insulin resistance is being driven by cortisol, not diet. So, the upstream problem must be addressed first. Archetype 3 is what I call T3 downregulated, or thyroid slowed. Okay, the mechanism is cortisol suppresses DIO2, which converts T4 to active T3. Now, T4 converts preferentially to reverse T3 instead, which is biologically inactive and it's not measured on standard panels. So, normal TSH, normal T4, but functionally hypothyroid. Now, this is a cortisol problem with thyroid consequences. Archetype 4 is what I call estrogen stuck. There are two mechanisms. Phase two liver pathway burden. So cortisol and estrogen are competing for detox pathways. Estrogen recirculates instead of being excreted. And the pregnenolone steal. Pregnenolone is diverted to cortisol synthesis, which depletes progesterone. Estrogen dominant symptoms in the context of declining overall hormones. Now, this issue is cortisol clearance, not HRT. And then archetype 5 is what I call estrogen disrupted or gut hormone dysregulation or disruption. Now, the mechanism is cortisol degrades the gut ecosystem that manages estrogen metabolism. Beta glucuronidase dysregulation reactivates excreted estrogen in the gut. The microbiome interventions stall because the upstream cortisol assault on the gut environment is ongoing. The gut sealing is not a signal to change the intervention, it is a signal to address what is driving it. So you are not starting over, you are adding the missing first step. Listen, if one of those descriptions just named something you've been living with, you probably thought of someone else while I was talking. Well, I want you to send them this episode, okay? The link is in the show notes. Now, there are a lot of women managing this without a name for it yet. Now, I'm going to walk you through the clinical logic of the rebuild, why the sequence is structured the way it is, and why the order is non negotiable. So keep your archetype in front of you, excuse me, in front of you as we go, okay? The tri shift, nervous system, rhythm, nourishment. 3, in that order. Let me show you why the order is the framework. So, axis 1, nervous system. Why is this first? I want you to think about what happens when you try to reset a sleep rhythm while your nervous system is still in chronic threat mode. The rhythm work does not hold because the system that it depends on is not stable yet. Think about what happens when you try to support thyroid conversion while cortisol is still suppressing DIO2. You are adding T3 support into a system where the enzymatic process is still being blocked from upstream. Think about what happens when you try to restore the gut microbiome while motility is suppressed and mucosal integrity is compromised by chronic cortisol. You are replanting seeds in soil that's still being salted. This is why nervous system is axis 1. Now, because it produces the most dramatic symptom relief, because it is the prerequisite condition for every other axis to work. Until you reduce the HPA signal, until you shift the nervous system out of the chronic threat state and restore the capacity to downregulate, you are building on an unstable foundation. The nervous system axis works directly at the level of the HPA signal itself. So the goal is not quote unquote relaxation, it is physiological downregulation, shifting the set point, not managing symptoms above it. That work has to be established before axis 2 becomes possible. Axis 2 is rhythm. Why is this second? Well, once the nervous system is moving toward downregulation, the cortisol rhythm becomes workable. The cortisol awakening response, the sharp rise in cortisol in the 30 to 45 minutes after waking, is not a stress event. It's the primary circadian signal, the mechanism that sets the timing of virtually every downstream hormone and metabolic process. In perimenopause, y'all, two things happen. The cortisol awakening response amplitude flattens, and the evening floor stays elevated into the window where it should be at its lowest. A blurred signal running every downstream hormonal and metabolic process off an unreliable clock. Rhythm is the work of restoring that signal. For the T3 downregulated archetype specifically, circadian disruption independently suppresses DIO2. Axis 2 rhythm is not just a cortisol intervention for this pattern, it is also a thyroid intervention. Restoring rhythm fidelity improves T4 to T3 conversion through the same enzyme your cortisol has been suppressing. The rhythm axis targets the circadian signal directly, okay, restoring the clarity of the cortisol awakening response and bringing the evening floor back down to where it belongs. It holds because the axis one nervous system work has created the stability it needs, and that stability is what makes axis three possible. Axis three is nourishment. Why is this third? Listen, nutrition has always been part of the picture. For most of the women that I work with, it's the part that they've invested in the most. The nourishment entry point is different depending on where the cortisol drift is creating the most pressure on your system. For the insulin inflamed archetype, the nourishment priority sits at the intersection of blood sugar signaling and the cortisol glucose cycle. The approach targets that cycle directly, not just the symptoms of it. For the estrogen stuck archetype, the nourishment priority is liver pathway support, specifically the phase 2 detoxification burden that cortisol and estrogen are competing for. The approach targets that bottleneck at the source. For the estrobolome disrupted archetype, the nourishment priority is estrobolome support, restoring the gut bacterial environment that governs estrogen metabolism. Critical qualifier for this archetype, those interventions only work to their capacity if the cortisol burden on the gut has been reduced first. If axis one nervous system hasn't moved, the gut environment is still under cortisol assault. The nourishment interventions hit the same ceiling they always have. Applied after axis one, which is nervous system, applied after axis one has begun the HPA downregulation applied in a gut environment where the cortisol assault has been reduced. They cross the ceiling that the same interventions could not break through at step one. That is why nourishment is axis three, not last in importance, okay? Last in sequence because it requires the conditions that axis one and two create. The tri-shift sequence is the architecture of the program I run. It's 8 weeks. It's built around your specific archetype, the specific protocols, what you do in each axis, in what order, for your pattern, are inside of my program. Now, the next cohort opens June 22nd, 2026, and the waitlist link is in the show notes. All right. I want to tell you what day 91, 9-1 looks like when this sequence is correct and the pattern is addressed. Well, she doesn't brace for 3 a.m. anymore because it doesn't come. The 3 p.m. holds. She trusts her own thinking in the meeting. She doesn't search for the word she used to know. The weight, WEIGHT, is responding, not because she changed what she ate, because she addressed the cortisol pattern, driving the retention first. She still lives with perimenopause or menopause. She always has, she always will, right? But she has a protocol built. She has a protocol built for her specific stress physiology. That changes what every day feels like. That is what the correct sequence produces. Now, one principle before we close, the one I want you to carry out of this episode. The reason most women do not see sustained results from gut hormone interventions is not that the interventions are wrong. I want to make sure I clarify that, and it's stressed, it's emphasized. It is that they are applied in the wrong order to a system that is not yet prepared to receive them. The biology of the perimenopausal transition creates a specific physiological sequence: hormonal buffer decline, HPA dysregulation, circadian disruption, and downstream gut hormone cascade. That sequence has a direction, it moves top down. The interventions that work, that produce sustained, not temporary results, move in the same direction. Nervous system first, rhythm second, nourishment third. Not because the gut doesn't matter, okay? Not because nutrition is last in importance. It is not. But because the gut cannot receive the intervention until the cortisol burden on it has reduced. The rhythm cannot hold until the nervous system it depends on has stabilized, and the nourishment cannot do its full work until the system it is feeding is running a clean enough circadian signal to direct those nutrients where they need to go. The right interventions applied in the wrong order produce the same partial results as the wrong interventions applied with full effort. That is the clinical reality of this transition. And it is the reason that sequence matters. The tri-shift is that sequence. That is the rebuild. Now, that is the perimenopause reset, y'all, for today. 4 things, though, before you go. Number 1, the gut hormone archetype quiz is in the show notes. It is free. It takes about 4 minutes. Your result is delivered to your inbox along with your specific entry point into the tri-shift. Everything in this episode becomes more precise once you know which of those 5 patterns is yours. Number 2, the full clinical framework lives inside of my free online community, Nourish and Flow Circle. You get weekly micro lessons, the full tri-shift stress test series, and the content that doesn't fit in a podcast, right? And that link is also in the show notes. Number 3, I'm on YouTube, y'all. I'm on YouTube. I do Wind Down Wednesday every week. Wind Down Wednesday is a longer form clinical content. If this was your introduction to this work, YouTube is where to go next. And number 4, my second cohort, okay, cohort 2 of the Done With You protocol build opens on June 22nd, 2026. It is 8 weeks and it is built around your archetype. The wait list link is in the show notes as well. One tap, follow the perimenopause reset wherever you listen. And if today names something you've been experiencing, send it to someone. Y'all, there are a lot of women in perimenopause and menopause managing this in the dark. You can change that for one person today. Well, I'll be back next week. Until then, y'all, do good work. Talk to you soon.